Hello and welcome to today's lesson on Cousin Kate by Christina Rossetti, part of the Edexcel conflict series. Now, first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at some context behind the poet. Then we're going to look at a bit of context actually behind the time period itself, which is really important for analysing the poem. Okay, so some context about the poet then. Christina Rossetti was born in 1830, the youngest child in an extraordinarily gifted family. Okay, so her father was an Italian poet, hence the name Rossetti, and her mother was a literary scholar. Okay, so she was a Catholic, and this is going to become really important when we go through the rest of the context behind the time period, but also when we look at the poem itself, which is really concerned with the role of women and to what extent they are allowed to have certain feelings, sexual feelings that would actually be considered sinful if you were a devout Catholic. So she is considered one of the best female poets of all time. She's certainly one of the best known. Her work is known for its focus on love and relationships. So why, you might ask, is it included in the conflict series of poems? And this will become clear as we analyse the poem itself. So some crucial context about the time period. So Christina Rossetti was born in 1830, as I've mentioned. She grew up in a time where women really had few rights. So women were effectively the property of men. So before marriage, you were the property of your father, essentially, or even the oldest sibling if you didn't have a father. And after marriage, you were the property of your husband. So this was very much what we'd call a patriarchal society, and that's a concept you would have covered when studying Romeo and Juliet. So women were thought to be physically and intellectually inferior to men. So they were considered physically weaker than men, which is perhaps scientifically factual. However, there was a lot of misinformation and lies about the role of women created within this patriarchal society, where they were deemed intellectually inferior to men. So women were supposed to be chaste, so this means they were not supposed to be sexual. It was considered that they were not even sexual beings, so they didn't have sexual thoughts and desires, and it was considered women literally saw sex as a means of producing a child. So if sex occurred before marriage, and remember, and this is coming back to Christina Rossetti as a Catholic, sex was absolutely something that could only occur after marriage, and really the purpose of it was to bear a child. Of course, it did occur before marriage in society, and if it did, it would usually be the woman who would carry the shame for this. So for men, it might be considered, um, a mistake, but an understandable mistake that they just gave into their desires. But the woman in that equation, in the affair, the sexual encounter, would be shunned or could be shunned by their whole family and by society. So there'd almost be a bit of a pariah or an outcast. And this is really important when we look at the poem Cousin Kate. So I think it's actually helpful to really sort of summarise what the poem is going to be about before reading it. So Cousin Kate is a narrative poem, and it's about two cousins who both fall in love with the same man. So Cousin Kate is described as good and pure, fairer than the narrator. The narrator is cast aside and looked down on by society for having a shameful affair, while Cousin Kate marries the Lord. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to read through the poem. I was a cottage maiden, hardened by sun and air, contented with my cottage mates. Not mindful I was fair, why did a great lord find me out and praise my flaxen hair? Why did a great lord find me out to fill my heart with care? He lured me to his palace home, woe's me for joy thereof, to lead a shameless, shameful life, his plaything and his love. He wore me like a silken knot, he changed me like a glove. So now I moan, an unclean thing, who might have been a dove. O Lady Kate, my cousin Kate, you grew more fair than I. He saw you at your father's gate, chose you, and cast me by. He watched your steps along the lane, your work among the rye. He lifted you from mean estate to sit with him on high. Because you were so good and pure, he bound you with his ring. The neighbours call you good and pure, call me an outcast thing. Even so I sit and howl in dust, you sit in gold and sing. Now which of us has tenderer heart? You had the stronger wing. O cousin Kate, my love was true, your love was written sand. If he had fooled not me but you, if you stood where I stand, he'd not have won me with his love, nor bought me with his land. I would have spit into his face, and not have taken his hand. But I've got a gift you have not got, and seem not like to get. For all your clothes and wedding ring, I've little doubt you fret. My fair haired son, my shame, my pride, cling closer, closer yet. Your father would give lands for one to wear his coronet. Okay, now that we've read the poem, what we're going to do is go back and analyse it in line by line detail. Okay, so let's look at analysing this poem then. So we start off, I was a cottage maiden. So immediately, first person perspective, but it's in the past tense. I was a cottage maiden. Okay, so what does maiden mean? So maiden generally has connotations with somebody who is pure, innocent, literally um, virginal. And the idea of cottage maiden. So this is a country girl. This is someone who lives in a rural setting, and she's generally, or she would be more specifically, of a lower class, a lowly status. So she's hardened by sun and air. So again, this is really kind of reinforcing that idea that she is a country girl. She's spends her days outside in a rural setting. Contented with my cottage mate. So again, all this is doing is establishing the character. She was actually quite content with her lot in life. She was content to be a lowly country girl with her other lowly country friends. So it goes on to say, not mindful I was fair. So what does the word fair mean in this instance? It simply means attractive, beautiful. So she wasn't aware that she was beautiful. And again, this reinforces the idea that she was very innocent. Although she was, we can picture a very beautiful country girl, she wasn't, because she was quite innocent, she wasn't aware that men would see her in an attractive light. So, and again, before we go on, was fair, was a cottage maiden. So her innocence is about to be taken, and this is where we're going to go on to the next line. Why did a great lord find me out and praise my flaxen hair? So immediately we've got clear juxtaposition here between cottage maiden, hardened by sun and air, which really kind of links to a working class idea and setting, to great lord. So we've got high status and low status coming together here. Why did a great lord find me out and praise my flaxen hair? Okay, so flaxen is a very archaic word, simply meaning blonde hair. So just reinforcing that idea of a pretty blonde country girl. This great lord has found the country girl, taken a like to her, the narrator, and it goes from there. Why did a great lord find me out to fill my heart with care? So clearly, this great lord who is attracted to the country girl, he arrives and presumably from this line, fill my heart with care. He initially treats her well, perhaps pays her lots of compliments, and her heart is filled with care. This next line is really interesting. He lured me to his palace home. So one thing to notice is palace home clearly links with the idea of he's of a high status. He is a lord, and this clearly juxtaposes with her own place in life where she's hardened by sun and air. She lives in a rural setting. He lives in a palace home. Now, the word lured, he lured me to his palace home, almost has a rather predatory note, as if he preyed on this poor country girl, luring her to his wealthy estate. The next line, woe's me for joy thereof. So she takes joy initially in this great lord taking an interest in her, showering her with attention. Perhaps she takes joy in, the setting, the palace home. However, she says, woe's me. So she feels ashamed that she was taken in by this act of the great lord. Why? Because and this is where we come to the next line, to lead a shameless, shameful life. So, as a result of this affair, she has a shameful life. People shame her. What does shameless mean then? So we've got shameless and shameful. So shameless is perhaps describes her own behaviour, where she shamelessly was taken in by the attention of the Lord, and she was drawn into this affair. And obviously shameful, the life of sin that people viewed her as having. So let's look at the next couple of lines. His plaything and his love, he wore me like a silken knot. Okay, so there's no getting away here from these sexual references. He used her for one thing, for his own pleasure. Obviously, he had a sexual affair with her, and it's almost quite unnerving, uncomfortable language that Christina Rossetti uses to describe this affair of sorts. His playthings. He literally treated her almost like a toy that could be discarded. He wore me like a silken knot, and we go on to the next line. He changed me like a glove. So this idea of a glove, something that if you almost picture a kind of medical glove, it's dispensable. You use it, then you throw it away. And this is how she feels she's been treated, used for sexual purposes, then discarded like she was nothing. So the next couple of lines. So now I moan an unclean thing. So as a result of this affair, she's treated as unclean. She's been used. She had sex before marriage, and now she's viewed as something dirty and unclean. Who might have been the final line of this stanza, who might have been a dove. So had he not used her for this purpose, she might have been a dove. What is the significance of doves? Well, it has connotations with peace, purity. But one other association of doves mate or are said to mate for life. They don't have lots of sexual partners, they mate for life. And this could have been her. She could have settled down, married someone, and had a mate for life had he not initially lured her to his palace, used her for his own purposes, then discarded her. So now we introduce the title character, Cousin Kate. So let's read on. Oh, Lady Kate, my cousin Kate, you grew more fair than I. So she describes her cousin as almost being even more attractive than her, more fair. Let's look at the third line. He saw you at your father's gate. So clearly he is this great lord. And again, think about this idea of a predator. He preyed on her. Perhaps he's going to prey on her cousin. So he saw you at your father's gate, chose you, and cast me by. So going back to that idea of being used like a glove, the speaker was used by the Lord, cast aside. Now he moves on to her cousin Kate. So he watched your steps along the lane, your work among the rye. So again, work among the rye. Cousin Kate is also, like the narrator, from a rather lowly setting, and this is reinforced by the next line: he lifted you from mean estate to sit with him on high. So a mean estate, she was not from a privileged background. She had, like the speaker, she was from a lowly background. To sit with him on high, so perhaps again this is a literal and metaphorical, so he lifted her up to sit with him on horseback, but also high. He lifted cousin Kate from a poor setting into his world, and obviously his world is that of he is a lord and he lives in a big house, a palace. Okay, so this line is very interesting, and we'll read on. Because you were so good and pure, he bound you with his ring. So I personally don't think that the speaker is being sincere here. This is almost a kind of sarcastic jibe at cousin Kate. So because you were so good and pure, he bound you with his ring. So unlike the speaker, who's an unclean thing, cousin Kate is good and pure. And remember, linking to this context of cousin Kate, the ideal woman was considered to be very moral, very chaste. And actually, back in this society, women were supposed to have a higher morality than men. So they were supposed to be really, really pure, whereas basically men were allowed to act in whatever way they pleased and kind of get away with it, as it were. Because cousin Kate is good and pure, he bound you with his ring. So unlike the speaker, the Lord is choosing to marry cousin Kate, and this makes all the difference in that society. If you are not married and having an affair with a woman, that woman is going to be shamed. But cousin Kate is not going to be shamed because the Lord is going to marry cousin Kate. So the neighbours call you good and pure, call me an outcast thing. So the speaker is rejected, shunned by society for being used by the Lord. Again, the Lord has no negative repercussions. He fully gets away with it, whereas the speaker is an outcast from society. The neighbours call cousin Kate good and pure. So again, it's the juxtaposition of situations here. Even so even so I sit and howl in dust. You sit in gold and sing. So again, more juxtaposition. She's sitting in the dust, metaphorically and literally perhaps. She is still in her lowly situation. She's an outcast by society. Everyone thinks of her as unclean, as used. Cousin Kate, on the other hand, sits in gold. Remember, she's been taken away to the Lord's palace, married, very comfortable. And she sings rather than howls. So think about how someone's in pain. They're in pain with their situation. She's singing, cousin Kate, because obviously she's got a very good life. So the final two lines then. Now, which of us has tenderer heart? You have the stronger wing. So although cousin Kate was stronger and obviously ended up in a stronger situation, the speaker is questioning who had the tenderer heart, who loved the Lord more initially. So the speaker goes on to say, "Oh, cousin Kate, my love was true. Your love was writ in sand." So really, she's questioning whether cousin Kate actually loved the Lord, because she says her love was writ in sand. And if you think about sand, if you write something in sand, that's going to be very temporary, very fleeting, and that's what she compares the love with. Whereas she says, "My love was true." There's a clear, again, use of juxtaposition here. Now, before we read the rest of this stanza and we're going to read it all together, put yourself in the position of the speaker. You have been used by the Lord, and you are now an outcast by society, whereas your cousin marries this same Lord that ill-treated you, and she is living a life of luxury. How are you going to feel towards your cousin? And remember, cousins, you would think, should be supportive of each other, their family. Obviously, cousin Kate, in the view of the speaker, has betrayed her. So let's read the rest of this stanza now. If he had fooled not me, but you, if you stood where I stand, he'd not have won me with his love, nor bought me with his hand. I would have spit into his face, and not his taken his hand. So really she is saying here, if he had not fooled, not me but you, if you stood where I stand, he'd not have won me with his love, nor bought me with his land. She's saying here, had the situation have been reversed, if cousin Kate, had you been fooled by the Lord, if you stood where I now stand, if he'd have won me with his love, or bought me with his land, I would have spit into his face. So she was saying she would not have taken his hand. Had she treated you in the way that the Lord treated me, I would have rejected the Lord outright and not taken his hand. It's interesting as well, nor bought me with his land, suggesting that cousin Kate is rather superficial, that doesn't really love the Lord, and she's already said that. She's already questioned cousin Kate's love for the Lord. She's suggesting that he was just taken in by his great wealth. But again, this is very, very clear what she's getting at here. I would have spit into his face, not have taken his hand. Again, it's up to the readers to decide whether we believe that or not. Do we believe that the speaker would actually have rejected the Lord had the Lord treated cousin Kate in a similar way? Again, that's up to the kind of reader to make their mind up there. Now, we'll finish with the final stanza, which is, and a revelation appears, a bit of a plot twist. Yeah, I've got a gift you have not got, and seem not like to get. For all your clothes and your wedding ring, I've little doubt you fret. So we set up a situation. All your clothes and wedding ring, cousin Kate's got lots of beautiful clothes bought by the great rich lord. However, she's suggesting that she does still worry cousin Kate. And why? Well, by my fair-haired son, my shame, my pride, cling closer, closer yet. So a real plot twist here, that as a result of the speaker's affair with the Lord, that affair produced a son. So even though cousin Kate gets to be married to the Lord, gets to have acceptance from her family and by society, whereas the speaker is an outcast, the speaker is the one who has a child with the Lord. So we end with the line, your father would give lands for one to wear his coronet. So again, the idea that although cousin Kate is going to have a luxurious life and live in a great expansive estate, actually the idea of a son is not one that can be bought. So in a way, the speaker is saying, despite everything and despite the fact that you've almost got the better life in terms of luxury and wealth, I've got the son. So it's almost, you could say, the speaker claiming a kind of victory over cousin Kate. Okay, so we're going to wrap up now by looking at the form and the structure of cousin Kate. And it is rather complicated. So we're going to start off with form. And remember, generally form refers to the type of poem, but it also refers to the shape, size, and number of stanzas. Okay, so the poem is written as a dramatic monologue. So remember, mono meaning one, it's one person speaking, but is speaking to someone else. In this case, the poem is speaking to cousin Kate. So it is also a ballad, and when we look at structure, we'll look at what this means. But it is almost, think about a ballad, I'm sure you're aware of the term. In terms of songs, we think of a love ballad. And again, similar in poems. but there is a much more specific form that a poem has to follow in order to be considered a ballad. So also with the form, it's written in first person perspective, and this is important because we really get a clear picture of the speaker's bitterness and anger towards Cousin Kate, which we wouldn't really get as much if it was from the perspective, if it was from third person perspective. So rather consistent stanza sizes, and this is typical of a ballad. But also on a deeper level, you could perhaps analyse that the fact that it has quite a attractive, consistent form mirrors the kind of message of the poem, the idea of the Lord. Although he seems very attractive and respectable, beneath that veneer of respectability, there is actually someone who uses and then discards women. Okay, so let's have a look at the structure of the poem. And remember, structure generally refers to the rhyme scheme. But in this case, we're going to have a look at the meter as well. So, Cousin Kate is written in an iambic meter. Okay, so the meter refers to how the syllables are stressed in the poem. And the way that the syllables are stressed gives the poem a certain rhythm. Okay, so it's written in an iambic meter. This means that there will be an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, and the way teachers often express this is by using D's and dums. So if we look at D, that represents the unstressed syllable, and the dum refers to the stressed syllable. So if there were, and when we have a unstressed and a stressed syllable together, we call that an iamb. Okay, so an iamb would be da-dum, D being unstressed, dum being stressed. And if we would put that together and we had, for example, 3 iambs together, we would have da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Okay, so if we think about that, and you can kind of repeat that as many times as you want, da-dum, 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 it gives the poem almost a kind of bouncy, easy to read feel. As you're reading through the poem yourself, it feels very rhythmic. And almost this kind of goes against, in part, the tone of, or the message of the poem, which actually is about almost a fallen woman, a woman who's been used, she's been shunned by society. But actually, by having such a easy, bouncy rhythm, da-dum, 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 perhaps it actually links with the idea of the Lord, and how the fact that he found using the speaker very easy to do, and actually he enjoyed himself, found it very easy to use and discard the woman who is the speaker, but actually obviously it caused her a great deal of anguish. There's almost a juxtaposition between the iambic meter and the key idea, dark idea of a woman being used and discarded. It also gives the poem urgency because the iambic meter means that the poem is very easy to read and it's very quick to read. So it also has a ballad syllable structure. So it alternates 8 syllable lines and 6 syllable lines. So generally you have 4 iambs, so 4 dudums, and 3 dudums. Okay, and this is all part of the ballad syllable structure. So the poem has a complex rhyme scheme. It has quite a complex structure in general. So the first stanza follows a B C B D B D B rhyme scheme, and to remember we use letters to represent rhyme. So the first, so for example, the second and fourth line will rhyme. The B's, the C doesn't rhyme with anything, and the, in this case, 5th and 7th line rhyme, and the 6th and 8th line rhyme. So it is a very complex rhyme scheme. The rest of the poem generally follows this, but there's subtle variations of this, so it definitely has a complex rhyme scheme. And again, it really shows Christina Rossetti, and why she's so highly regarded is her manipulation of the rhyme scheme. So how can we link the fact that it has such a complex rhyme scheme with the messages of the poem as a whole? Well, the sheer complexity of the rhyme scheme is matched with the complexity of the relationships presented in the poem. Really, the fact that this is a love triangle between the narrator, cousin Kate, and the Lord. So the complexity of the relationships is mirrored by the complexity of the rhyme scheme, and actually Rossetti uses the complex rhyme scheme to tie certain words together. If you were really to analyze it as on almost A level, in an A level style, the rhyme scheme ties different words and sounds together. So the complexity, but really, if you wanted to comment on structure, you could talk about the complexity of the rhyme scheme linking with the complexity of the relationships in the poem. Okay, so I hope you found that helpful. This was a lesson on Cousin Kate by Christina Rossetti, and there will be more poems from the the EdXL conflict anthology to follow.